nevrotica della depressione. Non è né l'obesità compensatoria dal sottosviluppato né quella alimentare dell'ipernutrito. Paradossalmente essa è un modo di sparizione del corpo. La regola segreta che delimita la sfera del corpo è scomparsa. La forma segreta dello specchio, attraverso la quale il corpo veglia su se stesso e sulla sua immagine, è abolita e ha lasciato posto la ridondanza senza freno di un organismo vivente. Più nessun limite, più nessuna trascendenza. È come se il corpo non si opponesse più a un mondo esterno, ma cercasse di digerire lo spazio all'interno della propria apparenza. Questi obesi americani sono affascinanti per il loro oblio totale della seduzione. D'altra parte non se ne preoccupano più, si vivono senza complessi, con disinvoltura, come se non gli restasse nemmeno l'ideale dell'io. Non sono ridicoli, e lo sanno. Aspirano a una sorta di verità e non a torto, ostentano qualcosa del sistema, della sua inflazione a vuoto. Ne sono l'espressione nichilista, quella dell'incoerenza generale dei segni, delle morfologie, delle forme dell'alimentazione, della città, tessuto cellulare ipertrofico e proliferante in tutte le direzioni. Obesità fetale, primaria, placentale, è come se fossero incinti dal loro corpo e non riuscissero a liberarsene. Il corpo ingrossa senza giungere a un partorirsi. Ma anche obesità secondaria, obesità di simulazione, a immagine dei sistemi attuali, che sono gravidi di quantità di informazione che non partoriscono mai. Obesità caratteristica della modernità operativa, del suo delirio di immagazzinare tutto e di memorizzare tutto, di spingersi nell'inutilità più totale ai limiti dell'inventario, del mondo e dell'informazione e nello stesso tempo di dispiegare una potenzialità mostruosa nella quale non c'è più una presentazione possibile e che non è più nemmeno possibile mettere in atto, una ridondanza vana che evoca un secolo dopo, ma in un universo cool, freddo e senza ironia, senza acido patafisico, la celebre Gidouille di Pere Ubu. Padre Ubu è un'opera teatrale, vero? Dovrebbe essere Padre Ubu. Ed è in mi ricordo di aver letto qualcosa, un personaggio fittizio. Ah sì, la patafisica. Al-Fajari è quello di mi sembra di aver letto un libro suo, la patafisica, sì. Baudrillard, Cesare Anticristo, Ubure, l'amore assoluto, Ubu in scena, immagino. Ah, ecco perché non mi sembra opera teatrale, è un casino da leggere. Comunque sì. Opera francese, surrealista, patafisica, eccetera. Patafisico-metafisica, questa isteria di gravidanza. Comunque, al di là della questione dell'obesità e della forma fisica, che devo mettere un po', rimane sempre inquietante. parte fat shaming, in parte non so quanto sia, perché c'è la sottile linea tra sì, fat shaming, però se c'è anche un problema di salute, ok, il fat shaming non aiuta perché comunque se un comportamento non è un elemento positivo comunque, ma l'elemento sostantivo che è l'ingrassamento nel corpo a volte non aiuta o non è utile, secondo me andrebbe notato, considerando il mondo dove viviamo. Però qui c'è un altro punto, che viviamo in un'obesità di informazione e noi viviamo in un tempo di obesità dell'informazione. Comunque noi viviamo in un tempo di quantità di informazione quasi trasparentemente perfetta, in cui tutto viene in qualche modo passato ed è catalogato in qualche modo, e mancanza quasi completa di conoscenza dall'altro lato. Se tu poi consideri che ti serve qualcosa come l'Internet Archive o archive.org per mantenere memoria di quello che è successo su internet 10 anni fa, perché internet è un sistema assurdo in cui c'è l'immagazzinamento della memoria del mondo, ma internet di se stesso non ha memoria. La memoria di internet è un processo di ristrutturazione in cui tutto è sempre al tempo zero. Prova a controllare quando e cosa è stato scritto in una pagina di Wikipedia, quando è stata scritta, un articolo di un blog, quando è stato scritto. C'è una difficoltà immensa nel datare gli eventi su internet, anche cose semplici come i video su YouTube, la datazione, a quando risalgono, in che contesto, dove sono, quando sono avvenuti e un dove. E stiamo vivendo in un mondo che è una specie di globo alla fine della storia, che storicizza il resto e sta inglobando tutto. Dobbiamo storicizzare internet. È l'unico modo. Oh, non l'unico, però ci servirebbe storicizzare, datare, inquadrare, contestualizzare le cose che avvengono su internet. Come storicizzi? Come controlli? Fortunatamente Twitter ha le date, ad esempio, altrimenti le timeline però non controlliamo spesso le date su Twitter, quindi cosa ti rappresenta una data su internet? Un momento storico, un video su YouTube, un post in un message board, cosa ti rappresenta al di fuori del suo contesto, messo fuori dalla storia su internet, ma sempre costantemente storicizzato perché si appella a forze esterne. E internet sta letteralmente inglobando il mondo della storia senza produrre storia, ma solo producendo magari storie, ma non storia, non produce neanche effettiva cronaca. È un danno umano viverci. Comunque, questa serie di gravidanze in ogni caso è un destino di persone della cultura americana, di quell'ambiente spettrale ove è lasciata in qualche modo a ogni cellula, a ogni funzione, ogni struttura, come nel cancro, la possibilità di ramificarsi, di moltiplicarsi all'infinito, di occupare virtualmente tutto lo spazio da sola, di monopolizzare tutta l'informazione su se stessa. Qui, se qualcuno ha presente Trump in Fox News, il feedback è già una struttura obesa, matrice di obesità strutturale, sì, ed è collarsi una felice ridondanza genetica, ogni molecola felice del paradiso nella propria formula. Dunque la causa non è l'obesità di qualche individuo, quella di tutto il sistema, è l'oscenità di una cultura. La quando il corpo perde la sua regola, la sua scena sì, però aspetta un secondo. Ok. Enjoyment. Since all the effort is made by the slave, the master is only to enjoy the thing the slave has prepared for him and to enjoy negating it, destroying it, or by consuming it. We are here with Kojéve commenting the phenomenology. So a lot of weird Hegelian translation. I'm not particularly fan of them, but it is what it is. What desire? The rest is written man before the fight, who was alone in nature and whose desire were directed without deter towards the nature, did not achieve, the master does achieve. Because master desires are directed towards things that are transformed by that are being transformed by the slave. So we are deep in the master-slave relationship, and mostly are deep into this kind of symbiotic parasitic relationship that Hegel delineates, and that is I want to say dialectic, but the Hegelian dialectic is this. So the point of a dialectic is being made. It's easier to say it in practice than in theory. So the master can finish off the thing completely and satisfy himself in enjoyment. Therefore, it is not solely thanks to the work of another, a slave, that the master is free with respect to nature and consequently satisfied with himself, but he is master or the slave only because he previously freed himself from nature by risking his life in a fight for pure prestige, which, as such, is not at all natural. Desire cannot achieve this because of the autonomy of the thing. The master, on the other hand, who introduced the slave between the thing and himself, is consequently joined only to the aspect of the thing's dependence and has pure enjoyment from it. As for the aspect of the thing's autonomy, he leaves it to the slave who transforms the thing by work. But the main point of Hegelian dialectic is also the main difference between a judgment and a syllogism is that a syllogism is a process. And in a process, you don't have entity A and entity B, and you don't have a judgment on a static entity. You don't have a monad, you don't have an entity with a set list of definition of things that you can define as. You don't have a human, and you say, okay, this is a human, that's human characteristic, and you can list everything as if the thing, the human, is completed in itself before the process. Judgment is judgment in Kantian sense and in general sense. You have judgment of things. This is something that everybody, when things about Hegel or in general, when we talk, describe, I don't particularly know Hegelian language in English, so I will probably make it way easier than it can be explained in English. is that gonna do? Oh, what translation do you want, man? Okay. Wait, I read something. China, France, Spain. Section this. I want. How do you? Have a nice day in different language. Allora, wait. Okay, so for completely unrelated reason, we will now find out how to say have a nice day in a bunch of languages. Make sense? No. Oh yeah. Wait.
طاب يومك. أتيت لأنني كنت في المنطقة طاب يومك.
Oh. Why not? Ah, no. Adesso mi sembra
يوم جيد.
un tempo sapevo almeno una uno di arabo usava un talago. Guten Tag. And buenos días. Feliz día. Yep. Che más? Ok, io il francese. Bonjour. Con un accento. Ebraico.
שיהיה לך יום טוב. בסדר, תפילה. שיהיה לך יום טוב.
Ok. What is your... Ok. Passi una buona giornata e viva con l'arabo. Ah no, con l'ebraico. Finita. Vai indietro. Il giapponese.
Yohi.
Yo.
わかりました。良い日を。
Yohi. Cioè, credo sia questo. Yep. Yohi.
良い1日。
Ti voglio bene, non farlo mai più nella vita. By the way, the point of Hegelian syllogism is that, wow, that was really like, get a dog. Polacco.
Pokój i dobro. Jutro. Miłego dnia.
Ok, vai indietro. So, my point in terms of Hegelian Felicia. Passa bene. Buon dia. Tiene l'accento? No, che viva il portoghese. No, quello che... What I wanted to say regarding Hegelian syllogism, if I had the presence of mind to do two things at the same time, Ozibuna. Bunya.
Ozibun.
Buna. Ozibuna. Is that... Oh, buon Dio.
Удачного дня. Спасибо за сотрудничество и удачного дня.
Ok, no. Che sta passando con ese idioma? Russo? No, il turco è in beta.
İyi günler.
İyi günler.
Dikkatiniz için teşekkürler ve iyi günler.
Ve iyi günler. Normale. Bueno, tenemos otros lenguajes. Nata in tutte le lingue del mondo. Google Translator. Evidently I am unable to actually do two things at the same time, but that syllogisms is not a relationship within fixed and completed element before the syllogism. So basically there is no entity A that becomes entity B, you know? And whatever, I don't know. Finish what you wanted to write. Check. Добрий день. And what actually happens during what I would call Hindi. Oh, love this one. During a syllogism is that why is that an entity is defined in the relationship. So, Kalimera. So, finish. Whatever is with this creative things. So, in the matters relationship, in any phase of whatever you think about Hegelian syllogism, or you are in front of an Hegelian formal Hegelian syllogism, is that there is an entity, there is A, and in a relationship in itself, A becomes something and is defined as something. It's defined like as itself in the relationship with itself. It's defined as itself in the relationship with its environment, and is defined as for itself in the relationship with its opposition. And in the relationship with its opposition, A passes from A state to B. And only when it becomes B, B has another set of a relationship upon which B is defined, and then it becomes C, and so on. So when they talk about history, when they talk about the state, when they talk about anything in Hegel, anything, in every context, Hegelian syllogism doesn't allow for anything to be defined without its context, without an opposition, without a relationship, and as a static thing that doesn't change. There is no absolute state in Hegel, in the sense that the existence of an absolute state is part of a bigger process that is called history. There is no absolute God in Hegel, because technically we made religions and gods and so on. There is no absolute spirit that is outside of the syllogism itself. It's the first rule, and I think we should all pay it. It pays off to remember that, and I think pretty much every instance it pays off to remember that there is actually, let's see, maybe a big maybe, and I'm kind of slanted, so I think it's a no. I'm upside down now. Okay. There is a friend of mine who's basically screaming out about the guy, and I have this much interest about this much about Chinese and European relationships, political relationships. So, and economy. I mean, it just as a rule of thumb, always never trust anybody who tries to present Hegel to you and in whose words there are some fixed entities in Hegel. They are not part of the process. Always trust someone that starts with, okay, let's start with the position of an entity in the system. Oh, Esperanto, solo perché, come on, we all remember the man, Augusto. The guy spoke Esperanto, right? I mean, you gotta love the writer. So, no, what I was saying, yeah. Always trust someone who places Hegelians, I wanna say, concepts in their place, literally, in the system. Never trust someone who talks about anything in Hegel as if it was static or not subject to change or not part of a process. The syllogism itself is a process. Ooh, love Korean. The syllogism itself is a processual entity. So, what actually whoa, our language is beautiful. So what actually happens in the system? No, that's not what we want. Latvian? What actually happens in the Hegelian system, in the particular cases like the master, it's quite easy to understand. People became human in the conflict, but in order to survive being human, you don't need the conflict, you need a recognition that the conflict brings. So the definition of the humans, both humans, starts as non-human. Starts as I am for me, I know of myself, I don't know of others. In the relations with the others, you acquire recognition for yourself and from the others. So you start developing as human. And in this process, you come to a confrontation. The confrontation is the moment in which you stop being just naturally physical being, and in this confrontation you need to win, but you do not need the kill. If you win and you kill, you end up in the same place. If you win and you don't kill, you end up in a different place. You end up as a master. Being master doesn't mean nothing more that you are in a process in which you are recognized by others as a different entity. You are recognized as human and as someone who has some specific rights over someone else. That someone else has specific rights over the world, over his own abilities. And you enjoy things, you are able to do things only through the mediation of the slave. That's why in the master-slave relationship, the slave is the actual subject. The master is not. The master is useless. In the master-slave relationship, the master as fruition of things. The slave creates, makes things. So the slave has the possibility to go on and be something else, keep forward in the process. The master doesn't. The only end the master can have is dying or fight another day, because his form of recognition is still stuck there. But master and slave is a relationship. You cannot have one without the other. Relationship in Hegel work in a pre-Aristotelian category, in Aristotelian way. The category of a relationship in Hegel is a relationship between a subject and the relation to the subject. There is science and there is scientist. If you cut out the science, scientist is nothing. So you have an entity and you have the relational thing to the entity. You have wings and you have alato, winged, something that has wing. If you cut out the wind, you cut out the wind. But if you cut out winged as a thing, you can use another phrase. You can express the relationship in another way. You can say it can fly. Not really, but you can try. The point is exactly there. Hegel uses the same thing, uses the relationship, but in a process such as Hegelian dialectic, there is no such thing as a subject that holds steady the relationship and doesn't change. It's as if you have this wing and winged. There is the wing and there is an animal who is winged, who possesses wings. And Hegel would say, yes, but also you have and stuff, but also the wings are part of a bigger historical process. So you have the ability, and I think this is most thanks to the idea of Trinity, the Christian Trinity, because the word refers to basically broke relation, the category of relation such as Aristotle posits. You have for example, these cases and the phenomenology that is basically the story of us as human beings, from us alone in nature, our origins in nature, that you can bypass because Hegel went like this close to actually reading Darwin, but history doesn't, like, history is a bitch, up through history and all these big things, all this big process is not even like Hegel puts in a very much more progressive way. You can cut down progress actually. You have to work a bit on it, but I don't think you can. I think you can safely bypass progress. And that's a piece of Greece. And what you have is the history of us, and it starts with something that we are, and it goes through to something that we are, and in every step of the way, every moment, we are in a relationship with something, and we define ourselves in the relationship with something, and through the relationship we move on. I am myself alone. I am myself in a society. I am myself with respect to the state. I am myself with respect to the law. I am myself with respect to my family. I am myself with respect to what I believe in. I am myself with respect to gods. I am myself with respect to Hegel. It's this series, and these are just short lists. This series of a relationship that creates this mutating entity that is the Hegelian subject. Hegelian subject, Hegel distinguished between object, subject, and individual. We are individuals. We are once finite. Subject of history is freedom. The object of history is humanity. The subject of history is freedom. There are no people. And I think that this point of view, there is almost, one of the things that people like this kind of displacement in who is the subject, who is acting inside the phenomenology, who is acting, like who is the actor in the master-slave dialectic. Who is the actor? It's not the individual. The individual is just like, it's the actor in the individual is unseen, but the real actor, the one who acts in that dialectic moment, is freedom, but in the sense of recognition. Is the recognition of human beings. And what is, and I mean, in this ok, però il maltese non ha il maltese come è scritto no so God dug. Pashtun. That's why. Whatever. Persiano, che usano la stessa scrittura degli arabi, ma non è arabo. Polish. Why not? So, when like I read recently, someone was talking about, like, very wrongly, by the way, about Hegel, or no, this is added some more, about Hegel was talking about the state and something stupid, like I think it was possibly something around the topic of politically correctness as religion, or something like that sense. And oh, such a, and it was quite stupid because I shown that there was no real understanding of what religion is in Hegel and what is the place for religion in Hegel, and most of all what is the Sudanese is like this. Who colonized Sudan? Germany? Whatever. Oh yeah. Basically, religion in Hegel, the role of religion in Hegel, religion is part of the objective spirit. No, religion. Spirito oggettivo, spirito soggettivo, spirito assoluto, is subjective spirit. It's at the tail end of subjective spirit. It's not absolute spirit, it's basically just a syllogism, you don't go there. It's objective spirit. So, first, it's still a representation. It's not an object in itself. A religion is just a representation of reality. And I think it's important to note that. Sperando che non siano insulti. Dai. Come scrivere in corsivo? Magari il Thai non è fatto per essere scritto. I don't know. It's really difficult to write it fast, right? Whatever. Crying, why not? Un bel po' di scritte di lingue usano l'alfabeto arabo. No, non faremo incazzare i cinesi, regola 1. So basically, there has been like in history a long and fruitful discussion on Yiddish. Yiddish? Guntag. It's like the alphabet is Jewish, but it feels like the content switch a bit more to not even German, but like that kind of Semitic. Okay, this should be solved. La valutazione di benefici realmente mi ha fatto la transazione definitiva senza alcun sapore del mercato domenico. Yeah, it is. These are that. Oh yeah, Germans really can hope for this agreement with China, and that I don't actually understand like the reasoning behind it. It's kind of weird. So we were somewhere in the middle of like yes, I was repeating myself. The point of syllogism. So, I mean, my point is like always, and I mean always, that when someone tries to use Hegel and Hegelian categories as if they indicate static judgment and not a process, because Hegel, first rule of Hegel, everything is a process, just as a rule of thumb. Nothing, I think it makes much sense. It's a rule of thumb. It works quite well when you actually have to go through and try to understand what is your, like, in terms of positions, how do they make sense, how much do they make sense, and so on. If you see someone that uses categories like God and state and religion in Hegel as if they were fixed entities, they don't change, or they are not in a relationship with something else, or you can have a reaction. They can be a reaction to something. They can be an antithesis to something, but they are to something. They are to themselves or to something else. That's the rule. If you don't see that, just run. It's just wrong. And I mean, I just was worried because using Hegel to justify what is basically racism, I mean, you can do it, and Hegel will probably be proud of you. But yikes, this is not a good way to use your time. Not a good thing to do. In general terms, in Kantian terms, whatever. Just don't do it. Why would you use your words to hurt someone else or to exclude someone? Like, it seems a bit unproductive and also very hateful. No. Why do I do things? It's not connected. Come on, baby. Baby, time. I know that. So I was somewhere. Kojéve. Okay. In these two constructs, constituent elements, the master gets his recognition throughout another consciousness. Owning them, the latter affirms itself as unessential, both by the act of working on the thing and by the fact that being dependent on a determinate existence. In either case, can this lavish consciousness become master of the given being and achieve absolute negation. Hence it is given its constituent element of recognition that the other consciousness overcomes itself as being for itself, and thereby does itself what the other consciousness does to it. That is to say, the master is not the only one to regard the other as a slave. This other also consider himself as such. That is actually an important distinction and an interesting note. Whatever. The other constituent element of recognition is quality. Wait. The other constituent element of recognition is equally implied in the relation under consideration. This other constituent element is the fact that this activity on the second consciousness is the activity proper of the first consciousness. For everything that the slave does is, properly speaking, an activity of the master. Since the slave works only for the master, only to satisfy the master desire and not for his own, it is the master desire and acts in truth the slave. For the master, only being for itself is the essential reality. It is pure negative or negative or negating power, for which there is nothing concentrated. This relation of master and slave is pure essential activity. The slave, on the other hand, is not pure activity, but non-essential activity. Now, for there to be an authentic recognition, there must be also the third constituent element, which consists in the master's doing with respect to himself what he does with respect to the other, and in the slave's doing with respect to the other what he does with respect to himself. It is therefore an unequal and one-sided recognition that has been born from this relation of the master and the slave. For although the master treats the other as slave, he does not behave as slave himself. Although the slave treats the other as master, he does not behave as master himself. The slave does not risk his life, and the master is idle. The relationship between master and slave, therefore, is not recognition properly so called. I still wish to understand if let's just take another road to get recognition. Love. How would it work? Would it be because love as a recognition form is not properly not classically made? That it's I would love, I would really be interested in a description of the recognition process through the lenses of love, of family. What type of recognition do I have with my mother? Because she made me. We all came out of our mothers. So there is a type of recognition that is not guided by fight, even though birthing is a gruesome process. It's not guided by love in itself. It's physical. What does it work? How does it work? What is the process? How long does it take for recognition to take hold and for the mother to recognize the son or the daughter as independent, as human independent of you? Can this really be achieved? Because recognition is not just this process, it's not just this path. You don't just have this path. You don't only have the encyclopedia as the only syllogistic. As the only syllogism, you don't have the phenomenology as the only path available for the spirit to arise in the world. You don't have only that path. What are the other paths for recognition? Because we have recognitions process every day, but we don't go through the master-slave relation. Why choosing the master and slave relationship? Why making it so gruesome? Is it because of going through medieval? I cannot say feudal. It's like bourgeoisie. I cannot actually pronounce those words in English. So, besides Hegel's choice to actually go through this process for recognition, that okay, fine, it's your choice. What about the others? Love as a recognition process. Respect. How does it work? What are the steps? do we have this kind of in-between station where you like A and B, one loves the other, and A recognizes B, but B doesn't recognize A? Like, what type of relationships can happen in the path of recognition that are not just this one? But by the way, the relationship between master and slave, this fall is no recognition properly so called. To see this, let us analyze the relation from master's point of view. The master is not the only one to consider himself the master. The slave also considers him as such. Well, the slave lost, so therefore, hence he is recognized in his human reality and dignity. But this recognition is one-sided, for it does not recognize in turn the slave's human reality and dignity. Hence, it is recognized by someone whom he does not recognize. And what is the value in that, by the way? And this is what is insufficient with this, what is tragic in this situation. Well, also what is tragic, and if I think it helps. It helps, like in Italian è servo padrone. By the way, in Italian, like literally, il servo è primo, like the slave is first. But I think the slave has such a strong connotation in English that is so difficult to abstract this narrative, this narration from slavery and from master and slaves, as you know, as it happened in history in USA, for example. It's so difficult. Well, if you think about it in a tamer way, like in Italian, servo padrone, it's doesn't like non è schiavo. It's not schiavo. Slave is schiavo. It's servo. So it's not technically like la serva di casa was like in the start of the last century. You had like these people, like la servitù was, for example, like the personnel at home. So it was like the lower people in downtown Abbey that would be considered like service people, you know. So when you read it in Hegel, like you read it in Italian, in this place you think about servo padrone, it doesn't have the violent connotation that you read that you have when you read slave. You know? So I think it's just a bit different, because yes, you can read that this is tragic and you have insufficient recognition because you are recognized only by someone you consider not human. But if you read it in Italian, it has a rather bit of different flavor, because in Italian you're just like this person who is the owner, that being the owner doesn't consider his service people, his service people in the service, as human as him. It's a bit more, it becomes like a class issue and way less an issue of conquest and most of all slavery, because it is strongly as like as slavery connotation in English. The master has fought and risked his life for recognition without value for him. For it can be satisfied only by recognition from one whom he recognizes as worthy of recognizing him. The master attitude of force is an essential impasse. It's also why the master invented God. On the other hand, the master is master only because his desire was directed not toward a thing but towards another desire. Thus, it was a desire for recognition. On the other, when he has consequently become the master, it is as master that he must desire to be recognized. and he can be recognized as such only by making the other a slave, but the slave is for him as an animal or a thing. He is therefore recognized by a thing. Thus, generally, his desire is directed toward a thing and not as in the first toward a human desire. The master, therefore, was on the wrong track. After the fight they made in the master, he is not what he wanted to be in starting the fight, a man recognized by another man. Therefore, if a man can be satisfied only by recognition, the man who behaves as master will never be satisfied. And since in the beginning man is either master or slave, the satisfied man will necessarily be a slave, or more exactly, the man who has been a slave, who has passed through slavery, who has dialectically overcome slavery. Indeed. Thus, the non-essential self consciousness is for the master the object that forms the truth or revealed reality. That is why I was saying, like, the master is basically a relic. The master is not necessary to the slave. The slave is necessary to the master. And the slave is someone who can progress in its consciousness. Like in terms of the history of spirit, the spirit that becomes the individual. The spirit that as individual chose the act of master ends there. The spirit that as individual chooses ends up slave and chooses to go through, that spirit is what informs our social reality. Now, this is also one of the reasons why Nietzsche says slavery, religion, and Christianity is the religion of slaves. By the way, there is a connection there. Never forget. Okay. Yes. The non-essential consciousness, slave, is for the master the object that forms the truth of the subjective certainty he has of himself, since he can know he is the master only by being recognized as such by the slave. But it is obvious that this object does not correspond to its concept, for the master fulfilled in himself something entirely different from an autonomous consciousness as coming into being, since he states with the slave. It is not an autonomous consciousness, but all to the contrary, a dependent consciousness that exists for him. We are in the antithesis stuff, processes. But it also is that the subject does not correspond to the concept. For the master fulfilling itself something entirely different. It is not an autonomous consciousness, but on the contrary, dependent consciousness that exists for him. Therefore, is not subjectively. Ok, perché sto parlando nella linea? Ok, it is not subjectively certain of his being for itself as of a truth. His truth, or to the contrary, is non-essential consciousness and the non-essential activity of the consciousness. That is to say, the master's truth is the slave and the slave's work. Actually, others recognize the master as master only because he is a slave, and the master's life consists in consuming the products of slavish work and in living on and by his work. And this is why, once you are a slave, the master is useless, and you should strive for the elimination. That is not a dialectical elimination, but a physical elimination of the master, because he's useless. The master has status and is there only because you are there. You are slave, proletariat. Fight. And this is why, like, it's an easy thing. We don't need Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos needs us. Fucking kill Jeff Bezos. I mean, we can also wait for a more dialectic solving of the problem, but also, like, I think we had enough revolution to know that they work. Fucking kill the king. Why not? Kill the king. So, like, don't do the Italian way. They will voting them out after they basically free gift Italy to Mussolini. Never do that. Just kill the king before. Do a republic or a commune or some kind of vibrant form of government. Just do something that doesn't involve having a king. Kings are stupid. And you roll genetic lottery. So, like, never roll the genetic lottery for the guy in charge of your government. It's not a long-term solution. Okay. Consequently, the truth of an autonomous consciousness is slavish consciousness. This latter first appears as truth as existing outside of itself, and not as the truth of self-consciousness, since they recognize human dignity not in itself but in the master, on whom his very existence depends. But just as the master is showed that its essential reality is the reverse of perversion of what it wants to be, so much the more will slavery in its fulfillment probably become the opposite of what it is immediately. As repressed consciousness, it will go within itself and reverse the transition itself into true autonomy. The complete, absolutely free man, definitively completely satisfied by what he is, the man who is perfected and completed in and by the satisfaction will be the slave who has overcome his slavery. At least it doesn't say the slave as a slave, because Hegel is not that stupid. Epictetus was that stupid, but Stoicism had its own kind of problems all around. Like, Stoicism was a philosophy for emperors and slaves, but slaves found in slavery in Stoicism a way to be a slave and not go crazy. Emperors found a way to be a common people. That is not exactly the same type of issues, you know? Just saying. If you want to study and to read some Stoics, no Marco Aurelio, yes Epictetus, because at least you're reading a slave. It's super rare to read a slave from like that 3rd century, 4th century after Christ. Like, very rare. So if idle master is an impasse, laborious slavery, in contrast, is the source of all human, social, historical progress. And this seriously, I think it works much better if you don't read slavery and you read, like, how do you say servo in inglese? Like, away. No servo sterzo. Servitude? A servant is someone who actually does stuff. Okay. I think servant is better. Like, come on, when it will come, like, a time in which they will, like, retranslate Hegel in English in a way that is actually not that one. Like bondage, like, no. History is the easily to the working slave, servant. To see this, one need only consider a relationship between master and servant. That is the first result of the first human social historical contact. And again, Why is this the first one? Why not family? Why not love? Why are we assuming that a fight, that antagonism is the first one? Whatever. No longer from the master's point of view, but from the slaves. We see only the slavery is in relation to the mastery. Servant is in relation to the owner, head of the house. But servant is also self-consciousness. What it is as such, in and for itself, must be considered. In the first place, it is the master that is the essential reality for the servant. The autonomous consciousness existing for itself is hence for it the truth, which, however, for it does not exist in it. The servant is subordinate to the master, hence the servant esteems, recognizes the values and the reality of autonomy, of human freedom. However, it does not find it, realize it in himself, it finds it only in the other, and this is his advantage. The master, unable to recognize the other, who recognizes him, finds himself in an impasse. This servant, on the other hand, recognizes the other, the master, from the beginning. In order the mutual reciprocal recognition, which alone can fully and definitively realize and satisfy man, be established, it suffices for the servant to impose himself on the master and be recognized by him. Effettivamente, for the servant, the master is a human being. To be sure, for this to take place, the slave must cease to be a slave. It must transcend itself, overcome itself as slave. Evolution. But if the master has no desire to overcome, and hence no possibility of overcoming himself as master, the slave has every reason to cease to be a slave. And moreover, the experience of the fight that made him a slave predisposes him to the act of self-overcoming, of negation of himself. To be sure, in the beginning, the slave who binds himself to his given I does not have this negative in himself. This is only in the master who recognizes pure negativity by risking his life, in the fact for recognition. However, slavery in fact has in itself this truth of pure negativity and of being for itself, for it has experienced the essential reality within itself. The slave's consciousness was afraid not for this of death, not for the moment of death, but for this own entire social essential reality. It underwent the fear of death and the fear of the absolute master. By this fear, the slave's consciousness melted internally, shuddered deeply, and everything fixed or stable trembled in it. Now this pure universal dialectical movement, this absolute liquefaction of every stable support, is the simple or undivided essential reality of the self-consciousness, absolute negativity, pure being for itself. Thus, this being for itself exists in the slave's consciousness. The master is fixed in this mastery. It cannot go beyond itself, change or progress. That is why Bill Gates does like gives a lot of money for free. Like, what is it called? They can help me. Carità. That's charity. You cannot go beyond yourself. It's just charity. There is nothing behind it. There is no production of everything. It's just, I will throw money that I obtained through essential slavery or a form of slavery to things that I caused in the hope that they solve themselves by being in the same system, and now I will throw money at them. Because he's a master. Doesn't need anything more than what people do for him? No. Ah, ha ragione il tizio che ha parlato della dissoluzione non dialettica del Signore. Vedete? He must conquer and become master or preserve himself as such or die. He can be killed, he cannot be transformed or educated. He exists his life to be master. Therefore, mastery is supreme given value for him, beyond which he cannot go. The slave, on the other hand, did not want to be a slave. He becomes slave because he did not want to risk his life to become a master. In his moral theory, he understood that a given fixed and stable condition, even though it will be the master's, cannot exhaust the possibility of human existence. He understood the vanity of the given condition of existence. He did not want to bind himself to the master's condition, nor does he bind himself to the condition as a slave. There is nothing fixed in him. He is ready for change. In his very being, he is change, transcendence, transformation, education. He is historical, becoming at his origin, in his essence, in his very existence. On the one hand, he does not bind himself to what he is. He wants to transcend himself in negation of his given state. On the other hand, he has a positive ideal to attain, the idea of autonomy, of being for itself, of which he finds the incarnation of the very origin of slavery in the master. This constituent element of being for itself also exists for the slave's consciousness. For the master, being for itself is, for the slave's consciousness, its object. For it, the object. An object that is known to be external, opposed to it, and that it tends to appropriate for itself. The slave knows what it is to be free, also knows what it is to not free, and what it wants to become free. And then he wants to become free. And if the experience of the fight and the result predispose the slave to transcend into progress to history, his life as a slave, walking at the master says, he realizes predisposition. In addition, slave's consciousness is not only this universal dissolution, taken as such. In the master's services, it accomplishes the dissolution in an objectively real way. In service, Zeus' consciousness overcomes his attachment to natural existence of the particular isolated constituent elements, and it eliminates the decision by work. In becoming master of nature by work, then the slave frees himself from his own nature, from his own sentence, the time into nature, and the made him the master's slaves. And the master's slave. Therefore, by freeing the slave from nature, work frees him from himself as well, and from his slave's nature. It frees him from the master. In the natural given world, the slave is slave of the master. In the technical world transformed by his work, it rules, or at least will one day rule, as an absolute master. And this master is derived from work, from the progressive transformation of the given world, and of men given in this world will be an entirely different thing from the immediate mastery of the master. The future and history hence belong not to the warlike master, a way that dies or preserves himself indefinitely in identity to himself, but to the working slave. The slave, in transforming the given world by his work, transcends the given and what is given by the given in himself. Hence, he goes beyond himself. He also goes beyond the master, who is tied to the given, which, not working, he lives intact. In fear of death, incarnated by If fear of death, incarnated by the slave, in the person of worker-like master, is the sine qua non of historical progress, it is solely the slave's work that realizes and perfects it. Then it talks about terror and fear and how the work makes you free. Seriously, not this ruined one. Ruined this expression, and I really don't want to go there. The point is not in general the works makes you free, is that the slave has technical abilities that imply that he is able to modify nature. And on the other hand, the Nazis were able to modify nature too. If with nature you mean other human beings. Yeah, recognition is basically this big powering motor of history. In Hegel, it's freedom, but the process of what we are is caused by this need of recognition. And I would really like to see a version of this recognition process that doesn't go through the master-slave dialectic. I don't know if this will happen. I don't know if someone else did it. Maybe someone did it. And I don't know.